I believe we are live.
Woo!
Whoa, welcome to Wellness Shots with Jewel. Today we have a different subject that I'd like to address. I'm really very nervous about it. This is not something, it doesn't come easy for me, but I believe, and my intention, I believe that we have to start this conversation. And I'm taking this step. I don't know how it's gonna go, but my intention is to ask questions and to listen. And I want to thank Lisa for joining me and for giving me this opportunity. So welcome, Lisa, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Jewel. I think that this is so great that we're just opening up and being willing to be uncomfortable and willing to, like me as well, like not look perfect and maybe not get it right just for the sake of like getting past that so we can have some good understandings and move forward. So thank you for taking it on yourself to really open up this dialogue for your community. I can't imagine it's easy.
No, it's not. And yeah, as the leaders, we get to have those conversations. The first question I want to ask, how do you feel in this uncertain time? What is it like on your side?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like I feel the waterworks already. So a little bit of background, I'm from Toronto, Canada. I'm from a super multicultural city. Nobody looks twice at you. And I honestly feel like up until now, I feel like it almost I don't want to say it hasn't affected me. Of course, I'm very aware of what's going on, but I haven't felt like it's had such a huge impact on me as it has in the last week. You know, the murder of George Floyd was absolutely horrendous, and the circumstances under which that came. I know for me, the part that I'm almost feeling even more is the case around Amy Cooper in Central Park, who, you know, called the NYPD on Christian Cooper simply because he asked her to put her dog on a leash. And that part terrifies me because these are people walking within our communities, the people who are probably friends in my phone. You know, it's so much easier with the enemy you know versus the one that you don't, who's among you. And that's the part that's really scary. So, you know, some things that have come up for me really over the last few days, really an example I've been sharing with other people to just kind of get a sense of what it feels like. My fiance and I are looking at actually moving a little outside of Toronto to the suburbs. It's super expensive to buy a home here. So just the suburbs, maybe about 20 minutes away. A few weekends ago, so just not disclaimer, but like advice or just update, he's a white guy. So we went to Burlington together. We drove there in his car. We would look around neighborhoods, see where it had a for sale sign, you know, look up the address on our phones and the phone numbers. And then fast forward to this weekend, my mom and I decided to go to Burlington together and look for homes. And then all of a sudden I had this very different sense of like, who's looking out the window right now and nervous that there are two Black people sitting outside in a car. You know, like very much minding our own business, just catching the list. Same thing I was doing with my fiance, but I'm like, you know, with him as a white male, you know, maybe there was an additional sense of comfort for people who are looking out. Having to think about things like when we do move into a home there, you know, like looking at the diversity in Toronto, which is 8.6% Black, versus in Burlington, which is 2.4% or something like that. That's going to be a huge change. And even having to take into consideration what's it going to be like when we pull up in front of our new home and the neighbors see the U-Haul, who's going to have that "there goes the neighborhood" joke in the background, and then be the people who sit at dinner with us on Sundays. Like, these are the things that are really opening up for me right now, and thinking about how everything that's happening, you know, like, I almost want to acknowledge that it almost feels like there's something like Canadian privilege sitting up here and seeing these things unfold in the States, and almost feeling that that doesn't happen here at home, but it does. Like, Amy Cooper is Canadian. She went to university in the province that I live in. You know, we had another incident with our own police force here in Toronto over the weekend. So just having that awareness that this is real and feeling it. This has been, like, I'm not the most emotional person. I don't typically break down in tears. Like, it has been a 5 times a day thing recently.
When you hear, well, now everyone is saying Black Lives Matter. And I have to say that 4 days ago, when I first time heard that, my response was, all lives matter. what do you hear when you hear that response?
Yeah, and this is the part where this is about me being really brave and not being perfect. I remember the first few times I heard it too. I was like, yeah, definitely all lives matter. I had to be, as a Black woman, I had to be educated on that. And, when I heard two examples, it really, really clarified it for me. I want to be clear, every life matters. There's no question about that. And the analogy to bring forward at this specific moment in time is, imagine, Jewel, that we're standing on the street looking at our houses as neighbors, and one of our houses is on fire. Let's say my house is on fire. And I say, my house matters. And you say, my house matters too. Or, my house needs water from the fire truck, and you might say the same thing. Like, there's no question that both of our houses matter, but right now, at this given moment in time, I'm the one who is under siege, and this is what needs to happen. So now I really have that understanding. It's also even another analogy that I heard recently that landed for me is, imagine that one of your loved ones passed away, and you are at their funeral, standing at the pulpit, giving their eulogy, saying how special they are. And someone comes up and interrupts and says, yes, but all people are special. That takes away from that. No one's denying that all people are special. There's no question about that. It's not even an argument or a conversation. But at this moment in time, this is the person whose life we're celebrating, and that detracts from the movement that you're putting forward. So, is when I heard it explained in those terms, that's when it really landed for me personally that, yeah, absolutely, right now, Black lives matter. Black lives are the one at risk. And at another point in time, it's another group that we're going to be focusing on to make sure that they are equal and that they are protected as well. But right now, with the events that are happening, Black lives matter.
What do you hear when a person says, I am colorblind, I don't see a color?
I really want to think that the person who says that has the purest of intentions. And I think if there's anything I've really learned between Monday and today, which is Thursday, in the last 4 days, is to have some grace for people who are working to navigate through this. But I also want to be able to have a conversation that is eye-opening. So to say I don't see color, it's almost optimistic, and it's almost like a barrier of protection. And it's something that somebody who doesn't have to go through the same things that I need to go through or am going to go through has to experience. It's optimistic to say that you don't see color, but then you don't see the struggles that I go through in life. Again, to bring it back to something super personal for me, and I'm hoping that people can hear my story and understand what I'm going through, and then imagine what it is like for an entire population to have their own version of this story. So again, fiance, white male. My vision, I only want to have one kid, and I'd love to have a daughter because my mother and I are super close. He's a little bit fearful about, with a girl and the dangers that can happen. It might be easier to have a boy. And he and I were talking, and I was like, as a Black female, there are a number of things that I can almost get away with. Again, I'm in Toronto, Canada. The last time I got pulled over by the police, it was a sunny day and we sang Taylor Swift. It was a very different experience. However, if we had a son, we have to have that conversation about, if you stop at a stop sign, you better make sure the car rolls back, because even that tiny infraction is enough that could potentially get you pulled over and get you killed. When you are turning at an intersection, if there is no indicator on, I am pulling your license. Those are specific conversations we need to have, because one tiny misstep that somebody else could totally take for granted, that they could distract themselves from the conversation, is never an option that I have to turn off.
When I feel like I was thinking about me wearing like no makeup, having no makeup, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, go into a grocery store, and then a Black person also just woke up, has no makeup, goes into the grocery. And do you think, or did you experience there is a difference in perception of other people, how other people will look at me and how they will look at you?
Yeah, it's crazy that you actually even use that specific example, because that same night I was driving home talking to Steve on the phone saying, our son doesn't roll back at a stop sign, license revoked. I was thinking about, like, I don't know if my son can even ever own a hoodie. Like, just the fact of the things that other people that don't have to think about, that I need to take into consideration for myself, for my future children, to be able to get by in this world, that are just things that no one else ever considers, are crazy. Like, again, even looking back at experiences that I had when I was younger, I remember when I was a teenager going shopping on Bloor Street with some of my girlfriends, and you know, like teenage girls walking into store, who's getting followed around, me and my two blonde friends or me, you know, like having to just always be mindful of like little things. When I go into a store, like my hands are always out. They may be by my side. They are never in a pocket. Like this is just a little thing that I have learned throughout my life to make sure that people see me as non-threatening, that I'm not suspected. So again, I'm not sure if other people ever do go into a store thinking little things like, well, let me, you know, fold my arms or like put them in a pocket. Those aren't things that other people have to take into consideration. I always have to be mindful of having them open and visible, so that if my zippers have to be closed, tucked under my arm so no one can think I'm doing anything. Like these are the tiny little daily things that just are almost exhausting when you have to pile one on top of the other just to be able to get by in this world the same way a person who does not have black skin would move through this experience.
Yeah, totally hear you. What is your view on the riots? What's happening right now that people, and we see that when we look, in my community, I am in a white community, the Russians, we came to this country in Russia, we didn't have black people. So for us, it's very hard to imagine and understand the whole history aspect of African Americans living here. So when we look at the riots and we see that most of them are black, the reaction is like, but you see, this is what they're doing. That's why we don't like them, or this why. So what is your reaction? What are we missing? What are we missing here?
So, you know, I 100% would love for everything to be done with peaceful protest. It is disappointing that these events are very distracting from the purpose of the cause. And I also feel like it's very distracting to be focusing on the riot and not the root cause. You know, there's cause and effect. And if we just talk about the effect, we're ignoring the cause. What created this in the first place? And here is what must be the most frustrating thing with my understanding of the situation. Because I'm here in Toronto, Canada. I do not have to think twice about leaving the house. But I'm talking to my friends in San Diego who are under curfew right now. Think about how frustrating this is. Colin Kaepernick, I think it's the 49ers he played for, and he just took a knee. The most peaceful thing you could do to have his stand. That was how he was conveying it. That got slammed like no other. You protest. Maybe people aren't hearing you. How are you supposed to have your voice heard? How are you supposed to get attention? Because unless we are making like noise and volume for people to hear us, like it's just getting brushed off. So it almost feels like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And we also have to really keep an eye on like, be aware, like again, this is where both of us are like, oh, I don't know the perfect thing to say here. I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means, and also pay attention to what is happening. Like I know a coach that we both work with was talking about how pallets of bricks are being delivered to neighborhoods because they know what that's going to incite in the news, you know? If you look at, there's a famous YouTuber named Paul Logan. He's a blonde white male. He got all involved in the riot. So like, is it all actually like black people who are doing this? Are there some people who are egging this on? We've heard of undercover police who are egging things on and joining in. So really actually have a very critical eye of what is being created and orchestrated in a specific news, in a specific story to make you think something specific as well of it.
Another question that's coming up a lot in our community is, well, we came to this country, we had nothing. And we went to work and we worked our butts up and we created something, our life. How come this black people are sitting on welfare using the tax money and not really making right choices? And I think there is also some kind of a big disagreement there that we don't hear each other. So I'm open this space to hear your story, to hear your reply to things like this.
Yeah, and think about again, and it's great that we're having this conversation today, even yesterday, because the last 48 hours, 72 hours have been a lot of learning for me. So I've also been learning a little bit more about systemic racism, how things have been rooted in the history of my grandparents to set me up to fail. And even if anyone on this live watches Billions on Showtime, I was just watching an episode earlier today, and they were doing some, they were looking for where our people who are not white essentially set up to fail. So they had homosexuals, they had Black people. And an example was going to the bank for a loan for a mortgage. And a white heterosexual male goes in, the bank officer gives him a rate of 2.8%. And you hear them going through the kind of checks and balances to see what would qualify him. And then there are, I don't think they had a Black person go in that episode, but they had a brown man and an Asian man posing as a homosexual couple go in, and the rate they were quoted was 8.2. So notice that there are things along the way that are setting us up to fail and make it a lot harder. If I can remember anything, as a little girl, my mother always, always, always instilled it in me that I had to be 10 times better than everyone else to just compete at the same level. And I don't think I'd ever, I don't know, I think I just thought my mom was being really anal and she just wanted me to really exceed. But then, as I've moved through life, I realized, oh yeah, I need to be like 120 to just be at 100 with other people. And even little things like, throughout my life, I've always been told that, I'm very well spoken, let's say. And I was always like, yeah, I'll put me in debating. I've been on stage. I speak on stages a lot. I travel to speak. And then I actually realized the undercurrent of, oh, you speak really well for a Black person. So there are a lot of systemic things put into, I was just learning about something called redlining. I'm not going to act as if I'm educated enough to speak to it, but I invite the community to Google it, where they marked off certain areas that were typically higher Black population, so that those schools got lower funding, so that they weren't able to get homes, and versus where if you came from, just 2 blocks over that was predominantly white, those schools were better funded. So there are little things to look into to learn more about. I'm definitely still learning about them. And it's just, there's a great video. I'm going to find the link for you, Jewel, that we can share to this. It's a YouTube video that talks about a race for $100. So this guy has a lineup of Black men and women all in a line at the same starting line, and they all have to race to get this $100 bill. But he puts out some disclaimers first. So, for example, if you grew up with both your parents, take a step forward. And there were a number of Black men who were still at the starting line. And he kept calling them out at different points, and then they were allowed to race for the bill. And you could see how set up that, the white male was typically set up to win, and the Black males were all at the back of the line. So some of them, one guy was able to sprint up there. I'm not sure if he's the one who won, but you see where we're not even all at the same starting line. And this is tracing back generations.
I have a question from one person here. What is your opinion about David Harris Jr., the author, and Candace Owen, conservative commentator, downplaying the killings of George Floyd, ranting about Black people not owning their mistakes, being criminals, etc.?
So you know what, I have to be super honest, that's not something that I've seen, so I don't want to comment on something that I'm not aware of, because I want to make an educated comment on it. So what I can promise to do for the person who asked that question, after this live stream, I will look it up, I will watch it, and then I will come back with an informed opinion and have a comment on it below. So let me actually know what I'm talking about so I can make an educated comment on it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Something else coming up a lot is, well, don't you think that if there was a white person instead of George Floyd, that we would even hear about this incident? And do you think the cops?
I don't think there would be an incident to hear about. I don't think we would be having this conversation right now, period. Whoever that person question is, would probably be fine. I'm trying to remember the name of this movie that I watched recently. It was brilliant. My fiance and I watched it. Give me 1 second. What was it called? Something about The Hate U Give. I believe it's a movie called The Hate U Give. I really encourage everyone to watch that movie. I think it would be a really big eye opener.
So what you just said, and my question is, and this is what I hear from our people, is if it was a white person who would have been killed by cops, there would be no big deal. But they're making this such a big deal about Black people.
We wouldn't have even gotten there. Like, I don't think there would have been a killing to speak of. Like,
So
take a look at some comparative things here. Like, let's say, for example, Dylan Roof. So he was the white male who went into, I believe it was a church, and shot a bunch of people. Let's look at how he was removed. It was super peaceful. It did not have to come to that. George Floyd was suspected of having a counterfeit $20 bill. There was no proof of a counterfeit $20 bill. There was no violence. There was definitely no one killed, and he was held down by his knee for 8 minutes. Meanwhile, this guy goes and kills a bunch of people, and there's a peaceful walkout. Like, that's something to think about there. That's a big difference in the charges that we're talking about.
and the white people, some white people feel that they are being discriminated because they feel like their lives don't matter, but the Black lives matter.
Their lives, white lives, have never been in question in the first place. That's something to look at.
Thank you, Lisa. So let me be going over my set time, and what can we do to bring this? I mean, this is obviously we kind in a breakdown, or we are in a shift. What can we, white people, do to make this world a better place for all of us?
Based on the conversations I've had in the last few days, I would say the best thing that everyone can start to do, if you have not already, is seek to understand. Do not have your opinions and your feelings and be committed that they are right. Allow space that they may not be. Seek to understand, listen, have conversations like this. Have an informed, the same way I couldn't answer that question you asked me before because I am not informed on it. Have that openness to the fact that there's something you may not know. Have the conversations, listen, open to another possibility before just assuming, nope, the mindset that I've always had, the thoughts that I've always had are right. I'm not openly burning Black people on the street, so obviously I'm not racist. Take the time to explore what kind of implicit biases may be there. Listen to the stories of people like me. Imagine, could that show up for you, and would you ever be subjected to those things? And have some empathy and seek to understand so that you can stand in support with us, so that we can get to a point where, you know what I would love? And again, I don't know if this is the perfect thing to say. How cool would it be if we didn't have to say Black Lives Matter because this wasn't a conversation, because these stats weren't disproportionately happening, that we were truly, truly all equal, and that we weren't having things like genocides, holocausts, all these things around the world. And it literally was all lives matter, because whether you were white, indigenous, Black, whatever you were, there was an equal playing field for everyone. I think that so many of us are wanting to be there. So let's get there, so that, you know, I don't want to say so that these conversations don't happen, but it would be powerful to like not even need them in the first place.
Thank you. So powerful. And I just want to add a little to it. I see a lot of people looking at the YouTube and looking for the YouTube videos to justify, like selectively, to justify what they think. And I see people like there are all kinds of YouTube videos there, and there are some that the people tend to look for the videos that resonates with them to prove their own point. And what I hear you say, just like be open, ask questions, don't go to the YouTube looking for all those videos. Go to your friends, go to your Black friends and ask them, and create these conversations, have these conversations even if they are difficult for you, just like it is for me right now. But if we taking a stand for a better world and for equality, then we get to act accordingly. We get to reach out, ask questions, and be open to receive and just listen. So this is my word for this month. And I want to take it probably longer than a month, but listening, just listen.
Thanks, Jewel. Well, I really appreciate feeling seen and heard by you. Thank you for opening up this conversation.
Thank you so much for joining me, for accepting my invitation, and for letting me here. your voice. Thank you.